my shoes and out the door. 5, I'm alive. 6, 7, 8, feeling great.
Hello, loyal fans. Here's a quick peek at our supplement, product, and book of the month for October. At the end of the podcast, I will spend a few minutes going into further detail, so check it out. The supplement of the month for October is our very own Probiotic Power, with the 10% discount code for the month of October being lowercase o, lowercase c, lowercase t, the number 19, lowercase HELTHYGUT. So it's October 19 Healthy Gut. The product of the month for October is Peak Tea Crystals. Look out for October specials. The book of the month for October is Now is the Way, an unconventional approach to modern mindfulness by Corey Allen. Keep in mind all the links, discount codes, and special offers for the product, supplement, and book will be listed in the show notes and iTunes, posted on social media, and in our weekly newsletter, and on our website at www.beyondyourwildestgenes.com at the Listen Now tab. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Beyond Your Wildest Genes podcast. I'm your co-host today, Dr. Mike Akinfora, and I am thrilled to have Dr. Elizabeth Stanley on the line. Dr. Liz, how are you?
I am doing well, Mike. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited. Dr. Elizabeth has written a phenomenal book called Widen the Window, and it is training your brain and body to thrive during stress and recover from trauma. There's not a lot out there on this topic, and I'm thrilled to have Dr. Stanley on the show. So I'm going to read you her bio, and then we're going to have a little deeper dive into how she got here, and then we'll get into the book. So, Elizabeth A. Stanley, Ph.D., is an associate professor of security studies at Georgetown University. She's the creator of Mindfulness-Based Mind Fitness Training, that's MMFT, taught to thousands in civilian and military high-stress environments. MMFT research has been featured on 60 Minutes, ABC News, NPR, and in Time Magazine, and many other media outlets. An award-winning author and U.S. Army veteran with service in Asia and Europe, she holds degrees from Yale, Harvard, and MIT. She also is a certified practitioner of Somatic Experiencing, a body-based trauma therapy. Dr. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you again, Mike, for having me, and please call me Liz.
You got it. So, Liz, give folks a little deeper dive into your background and how you got here and why a book.
Yes. So I am an Army brat. I'm actually from a long warrior lineage. There has been a Stanley serving in the U.S. Army every generation since the Revolutionary War. I'm the first female Stanley to serve in this lineage. But what this means is that I both grew up moving around a lot, 10 times before I went to college. And I also come from a lineage of family trauma. My grandfather saw combat in the Pacific during World War II and again during the Korean War. And my dad was in Vietnam. And, both of them suffered trauma after their combat experiences. The PTSD diagnosis didn't exist yet at the time that both of them were serving. But unhealed trauma and chronic stress, when we haven't recovered from it, it has effects not only on us, but on the people around us. And so I think I was drawn to this topic, I was born into it. There was this long lineage of intergenerational trauma. I experienced a lot of childhood adversity. I experienced chronic stress while I was on active duty in Korea and then in Germany, and even had a near-death experience when I was deployed in Bosnia. And when I left active duty, when I got to graduate school, I was diagnosed with PTSD myself, and I was suffering from a range of different physical symptoms that I finally now understand why all of that was going on. But it was in my own healing journey that I got very interested in these topics. And after experimenting with a range of different therapies and yoga and meditation techniques, both here and I did some time in a monastery in Burma, and then clinical training myself in body-based trauma therapies, once I realized that this required actually addressing the body and the survival brain, not just, my thoughts about what was going on. All of that together made me realize I wanted to be sharing some of these things and this roadmap towards health with others. And so this book is both the outgrowth of my own journey and of the decade of work that I have done, having offered MFIT, that's how we pronounce MMFT, the way we say the acronym, pronounced. We've offered MFIT in a range of different settings. I partnered with neuroscientists and stress researchers to test its effectiveness among troops before they deployed to combat. And so this is both based on personal stories and on just a wealth of empirically backed research. So there's nothing in this book that I haven't learned from in my own mind and body, but I also want readers to understand that it's backed by empirical research that we've published and a wide range of other research, empirically backed research that I have done over the last several years in terms of stress, trauma, and resilience.
That's fascinating. And it's amazing in the health and wellness space that most of us have gone through our own journey and then feel the need to not just keep it to ourselves, but to share it, to be what am I looking for? To be bigger than something than oneself.
Yes, I think that's true. And I actually think some of that is even neurobiologically conditioned. We're taught to think of ourselves as very separate and having these things going on with just us and being about us. But I think the last 15 years of research are really beginning to show the ways that we are really wired to connect. And I think it's some of that wiring for connection, the way that we really are social animals, that helps to propel us to want to share what we've learned, because it's not just going to have an impact on us, it's going to have impact on everyone that we're with.
Absolutely. So let's dive into this and look at it. And the book is broken up into 3 parts, and I don't want to give everything away, but talk to me and talk to us about life on the gerbil wheel. Like, what does that mean?
Yes. So the first part of the book, I really, let me say I had 2 goals with this book. One was to share this roadmap for moving towards health and wholeness. But the second goal of the book was really to engage readers in a reflection about how we collectively deal with or don't deal with stress and trauma. Some of the cultural norms and habits that we share and that we've set up our institutions to incentivize that actually can exacerbate our stress and trauma and make things worse. And the first part of the book is really focused on some of those cultural norms. And I call living in this particular set of structures like on the gerbil wheel. Many of us have been taught, and I was truly exhibit A of this myself, that the best way to deal with stress and trauma is to just, keep going. That there is tremendous value in being gritty and in pushing through. In the military, they often call that suck it up and drive on. This capacity to just keep going and persevere despite the adversity. Without really focusing on it, because focusing on it is in some way would be weak or kind of giving in to it. And, there are clearly benefits to being able to have that kind of willpower and perseverance. And certainly in particular life and death situations, being able to do that is absolutely critical for us to survive. But this way of being all the time as a habitual way of going, constantly going without recovery, kind of constantly compartmentalizing and suppressing our physical pain and our emotions, all of this actually over time begins to have tremendous wear and tear on our mind and body. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very counterproductive over the long term. And, we might want to be doing it differently, but we're living still in a wider sort of social conditioning that really has some mixed messaging. We say we want life balance. We say we want, that relationships and health are important. But then we're making choices both, in our education system and our workplaces that are making it really hard to live and walk the talk of life balance and health. So I wanted to call attention to that. And I think a big piece of why that plays out as much as it does is that trauma happens when our survival brain, an unconscious part of our brain, perceives us to be helpless or powerless or lacking control. And so when we've been traumatized, it's often a situation where it brings up a lot of shame. And for many people, it's hard to acknowledge and turn towards this experience of when we might not have been in control, when we might have been powerless. And so we do a lot of disowning of it. And then it begins to come out sideways in our physical health, in our behavior, and in a variety of different mental and physical diseases that we can end up developing that are hard to deal with. We disconnect the stress from its consequences.
That's brilliant. Disconnect the stress from its consequences. Talk to me about where does this start? Like you're talking about when a person feels powerless and shame. Like how far back do you see this going?
It's a great question, Mike. Well, can I quickly unpack the metaphor of the window so that I can explain this better? Would that be okay?
100%.
I go take a
Absolutely.
quick tangent here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So the window that I'm talking about widening in the title is the window of tolerance that each of us has to stress arousal. And when we're inside our window, our thinking brain and our survival brain can be working together as allies. When we have a wide window, we can function really well and cooperate with others, offer support, get support, receive support when we're in stressful situations. We can keep our deliberate decision-making capacity online. We can regulate our emotions, and we can let our behavior be really intentional. And after that, after the stressful experience, we can recover, we can downregulate, and then learn to adapt. So people with wide windows are really much more flexible during uncertain situations. They can adapt when plans get interrupted. They're comfortable with change. It's a really lovely thing when we have a wide window.
Sure.
Our window initially starts being wired as early as while we're still in the womb. Recent research is really showing how much, especially the third trimester, we are already wiring aspects of our nervous system, of our immune system, of our brain, and so we are picking things up environmentally from our mother while we're still in the womb. And then the wiring continues through childhood and into early adolescence for the nervous system. And up to our thinking brain, we're still doing some of that wiring up until our early 30s. And so what this means is that our window is initially wired through our social environment and through the things that we are doing on a repeated basis, things that are happening on a regular basis. And much of that is unconscious. And certainly when some of the most important parts of that wiring are happening, we are pretty powerless. We're young. We don't have a lot of physical control. We can be easily overpowered. We haven't really wired all of our reasoning capacities yet. And yet some of these patterns that we wire in childhood during chronic stress or trauma in childhood, they have lifelong effects. They create a lifelong, they have a trajectory that really affects the width of our window over our life if we are not kind of aware of how that happens and making different choices today maybe to help widen the window. So our window can narrow through three pathways that I outline in the book. The first is childhood adversity. The second is shock trauma events, like a natural disaster or a mass shooting or combat or rape. And the third way that we can narrow our window is kind of everyday chronic stress that most of our thinking brains write off as completely, no big deal. Chronic sleep deprivation is a very common way to narrow the window. And most of us just don't even give any thought to chronic sleep deprivation as having this longer term effect. Chronic tension in close relationships, either at work or at home, racism, sexism, poverty, even emotional labor, where we have to kind of hide our true feelings to show a certain kind of emotional climate, in our workplace. Having to do that on a regular basis, or managing other people's emotions in our workplace. These things have effects on the window too. So everybody's window can narrow if we're not getting enough recovery. And the reason I call the book Widen the Window is I really want to point out that it's not all just bad news. We can make repeated choices that can actually help widen the window too. And even those of us who came from backgrounds of childhood adversity where we may have started life with a really narrow window, we still have the possibility through our repeated choices to be rewiring that and fully recovering and moving our window to a much wider place.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting. I equate some of what you're saying, this chronic tension. So in nature, if the impala is out in the Serengeti and running around with all its other impala friends, and a lion happens upon it, and it is a near-death experience for that impala, what it does after that experience is it literally has a full body shake. And
yes,
we're told, because obviously we can't ask the impala, but we're told that that's enough for it to basically shake it off and then go about its daily business. And we don't have many tools for that. We haven't grown up with those tools. So we're seeing today where this chronic everyday stress is becoming more and more problematic. And I think it's evident in our chronic disease state that we're in today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Collectively in the United States, we have a lot of people with narrow windows. And I would say actually we have a collectively narrow window. And as you point out, we just have these very high rates of physical illness and chronic diseases and mental illness. We've had just skyrocketing rates of anxiety and depression and substance use and suicide. The suicide rate has been kind of astronomically growing, especially since 1999. The rate has really gone sky high. And you're right. A big piece of it is we are living in this chronically stressed state where we're turning stress arousal on and we're not turning it off, partly because of these cultural norms that lead us to, overextend ourselves, overextend our limits without recovery, live where we're having such short time horizons for our deadlines that we have to work all-nighters or not taking weekend off, things like that. But also just that many of us look, one of the things that really is striking to me when I'm teaching in a wide range of settings, very, very common thing that I see is that people will often say to me, the kinds of, I have anxiety, I've had anxiety for 20 years, they might say, but it's really no big deal compared to those troops that you've trained. I mean, I haven't been to Iraq and Afghanistan. I haven't had to deal with something like that. So, and they immediately kind of devalue and dismiss their own stress in comparison to these big shock trauma events that they're seeing other people having experienced. And it's very common for us humans to do that. We compare ourselves with other people all the time. And our thinking brains think it's actually helpful for us to kind of minimize or devalue, the everyday stress of sitting in traffic and paying bills and having tension in a close relationship or having, just chronic sleep deprivation. These things seem kind of garden variety and bland. And of course that shouldn't be causing me problems, right? But the problem is when our thinking brains have that perspective about these experiences that are leading us to turn stress on without turning it off. We aren't giving ourselves credit for the fact that we've turned stress on without turning it off, and then we're not doing the things that we need to do to help support the survival brain to do the recovery it needs to do. You know, one of the most important messages I am hoping that my book can get out into the world is that recovery is a survival brain job. We can't think our way into recovery. It's not something that our conscious thinking mind can do. Only the survival brain controls turning stress on and turning stress off. And the survival brain will not start recovery. It will not turn on all of these recovery functions it innately knows how to do if the survival brain in that moment isn't feeling safe. You talk about the impala who's gone, you know, he's been chased by the lion, or his whole herd has. You know, maybe the lion got one of the weaker or older members of the herd, and the rest of the herd has made it safely to another savanna a couple miles over. And now they're all staying there, the lion's gone, and they all start shaking. That process of their body starting that shaking to do the recovery, the impala is doing it instinctively. It's not having to say like, oh, well, you know, I didn't have combat in Afghanistan, so I can't do recovery right now. Because the impala survival brain just knows how to do it. Our survival brain knows how to do it too, but as humans, we have this additional layer of this thinking brain that can interrupt what's going on with the survival brain. And so many of the techniques I teach in the book, part 2 is all about the science so that everybody's thinking brain can understand why their mind and body are doing what they're doing, why they're feeling cravings in a particular way, why they're feeling drawn to certain coping habits. I want thinking brains to understand so that by part 3, thinking brains can really help become allies to survival brains. For me, it was so liberating to learn all of that science, to understand why I was having the symptoms I had, why I was behaving the way I was behaving. And it helped me take it much less personally because it was neurobiological conditioning playing out. It was amazing to help me quiet the shame and self-criticism I had about the many ways that I was trying to cope with my stress, but wasn't actually helping my system fully recover.
Absolutely, and this is where I assume the MFIT comes in. But I think in telling your story, I think it's really important. There is a huge difference between the thinking brain, which is logical, and we can logic our way around a lot of stuff, but it doesn't.
Yes, we can.
But it doesn't even touch the surface of that survival brain.
That's absolutely right. So, and many of us have learned to identify with our thinking brain as our whole brain, or even as a major part of our self-identity. You know, our thinking brain is evolutionarily the newest part, and we know it's active when we hear that inner kind of running commentary and narrating and thinking. When we hear those things in our head that are verbal with words, that is the thinking brain in action. The survival brain isn't verbal, so we can't hear its message the way we can hear our thinking brain's message. It is evolutionarily older. We share those parts of the brain with mammals, and even some of the oldest parts we share with birds and fish and reptiles. I mean, these are very old parts of the brain, and they are unconscious. They are fast and automatic, and they exist. The reason I call it the survival brain is they exist to help us survive. So they're doing this process unconsciously, rapidly, outside of our thinking brain's awareness, and we can't hear it in our head. The way we know what's going on in our survival brain is by seeing the effects that it produces in our body, because it's the survival brain that turns on all of that different parts of the hormone system to create the physical sensations that come with stress. You know, the rapid heart rate, the sweaty palms, the butterflies in the stomach. And the survival brain also is what is responsible for helping to create our emotions. So if we're angry, if we're afraid, if we're anxious, if we're feeling ashamed, if we're feeling happy, all of these are ways that the survival brain communicates with us. And one of the ways to help really train the thinking brain to become the survival brain's ally is to help the thinking brain be able to cultivate enough capacity to pay attention to these different things in our body so that we can see the cues that the survival brain is trying to show us, and then we can make choices that take into account what's going on in our survival brain right now. Because if we don't help the survival brain, if we don't help set the conditions for the survival brain to feel safe, it's not going to be able to do the necessary recovery that we need to get out of that constantly stressed state.
Absolutely. So it's marrying the two. It's partnering the two.
Yes.
And that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
So talk to me a little, Liz. Talk to me a little bit about how does the thinking brain better pay attention to those cues so that you stop doing these things?
So
tell me it all.
Yeah. I designed MFIT to really help create both the concept, and that's the mailman with Chloe. Sorry about that.
Speaking of the survival brain.
Speaking of the survival brain being on alert for threats. What's fascinating is she knows him and he knows her, and so she both barks and her tail was wagging at the same time. If we have not trained our attention doesn't belong to the survival brain, or awareness doesn't belong to the survival brain. It's actually outside of and beyond both the thinking brain and the survival brain, and that's what allows us to be able to pay attention to our thoughts and see them as observable things, or to pay attention to physical sensations or emotions. So learning to be able to access awareness and see these things with non-judgmental curiosity, without taking them personally, without feeling critical about them, that's a key first step. And to do that requires first training our attention so that we can stabilize and hold our attention, even to pay attention to things that might be uncomfortable. And, that's something that we have to learn to tolerate over time. And with practice, with consistent practice, we can train ourselves to do that, to tolerate uncomfortable sensations and emotions and thoughts without taking them personally, without trying to fix them, without trying to push them away, just to see them clearly so that we can gain the information from them and then make the choice about what we're going to do next. So initially, the first few exercises in MFIT are all focused on building this attentional control, and then that's married with an understanding of the way our minds and bodies work so that we can both know what those different cues are that we're seeing in our body, like the sweaty palms or yawning, different kinds of cues telling us different things. And then so we can learn to direct our attention in particular ways at particular times to help the survival brain feel safe. The book is not the MFIT course, but I do have the 2 core exercises for how to help train the thinking brain to support the survival brain feeling safe. They are in the book, and if any of your listeners want the actual audio guidance in addition to the written instructions in the book, they can go to my website and download the first exercise to practice that way. But the idea here is both teaching the thinking brain what's going on when and why, so the thinking brain will want to help support the survival brain, and then directing our attention in ways that the survival brain feels safe. As soon as it does, it naturally knows how to do recovery. You don't have to make the recovery happen. All we have to do is set the stage for, set the conditions so that the recovery will naturally turn on and do its own thing. This is one of the reasons why sleep is so important for us, because when we're sleeping, our thinking brain is offline, and when we're sleeping, our survival brain is usually neurocepting. It's usually appraising that we're safe. And so we do a lot of our recovery functions while we are getting restful sleep. And if there's one thing that your listeners could do differently, if they are feeling chronically stressed, is get more sleep. I mean, even before you think about training your attention, just getting good sleep is an important piece, because that's when the survival brain can get a lot of that recovery done.
Absolutely. And we'll put that in the show notes. We'll put the link for the first exercise so that folks can go there and download that. But I can vouch for the lack of sleep, and coming from that male-dominated, I'll sleep when I'm dead. I don't need to sleep. The first semester of chiropractic school, having 52 exams in 10 weeks and just not
Oh
sleeping.
my gosh.
Having a daughter that did not sleep through the night for 5 years straight. Really had never. It is when I was my most unhealthy. I was over 300 pounds. Diabetic, high cholesterol, all of it. And lo and behold, school started, and she slept through the night. My wife and I ran in the room because she had never, ever, ever slept through the night. So I can vouch for how important sleep is. And now, 17 years later, we're able to track our sleep and see the quality of sleep, and that's really, really, it is one of our biggest, as you said in the book, it is our biggest obstacles to overcome.
Absolutely it is. And I think there's just been such this explosion of peer-reviewed empirical research about so many different dimensions of ourselves that are affected by sleep. I cover many of them in Chapter 9, but I'm sort of just scratching the surface for them. There's just been so much research, and it's linked to so many different things. Our immune system, our weight, our metabolism, the functioning of our cardiovascular system, our ability to read emotions that are not related to threat, our ability to pay attention, our ability to reason, to downregulate our emotions, to access willpower. I mean, it's kind of global in its effect. I can't even imagine what 5 years of that was like for you. I did about a decade of my life where I was sleeping in between 2 to 4 hours a night. Partly, I now know in retrospect, because I had PTSD. I was stuck on high, and one of the classic signs of the stuck on high dysregulation is insomnia. But I didn't understand that was actually linked to those. I didn't see those things as connected. I just saw myself as being super productive and doing all of these things and, being really busy. And I saw it as a good thing. And yet it has just tremendous effects on our physical health over the long term.
It is, and I don't know if we ever recover from that. And in the past, it takes a lot.
It does. It takes a big toll. And I know that I am so much healthier today than I was in my 20s. There is no doubt. And
yes.
I have certainly, I think, turned off some of the gene expression that I had turned on from chronic sleep deprivation. I know I have probably repaired and turned some of that off. But I also know that there's some costs to my system, some aspects of dysregulation that are always going to be there. I'm always going to be more sensitive because of so many decades of living in such a dysregulated state. that doesn't mean that we can't undo some of it, but of course, any organism is going to have kind of downstream effects from something that is that long term. But we can turn off epigenetic changes that were in a detrimental direction. It is possible. I know in my own life, I've seen it in the empirical research. So I don't want any of your listeners to have the feeling of, I have so many years of having made bad choices. I guess I'm just sort of screwed. I don't want them to have that thought at all. I want them to know that we can choose different habits, with diet, with sleep, with exercise, with social connections, with attention training. All of these things can have beneficial changes if we're doing it consistently.
I agree. And over millennia, there were many ways of dealing with stress and trauma, very few of which were really healthy for us and helped to reverse the effects of this. But now, I say to people, especially when they come in the office to see us, there's really, contrary to what you see on TV, there's really never been a better time to be alive because we have so much access to information. We weren't even past that first step, 50, 60 years ago of the information. Now, we do have the inflammation, that's Freudian slip there, information, not inflammation, but we now have to implement it, and Widen the Window helps that amazingly, what you're talking about.
Thank you. That was really the reason I wrote it. I want it to be able to help people. I know from firsthand experience in my own life, from having witnessed the window widening journeys of the many, many people I've trained in so many different settings, to just see the changes. And none of it's sexy. And this is another way that our life in the gerbil wheel culture can kind of work against us. We're all sort of conditioned to seek the silver bullet or the perfect pill because everybody wants it better right now. And, if we had just the perfect technology that somehow it's going to make it better, that doesn't work. I mean, just like it took us many, many years of conditioning, doing certain unhealthy choices or being in really challenging events and not having fully recovered from them over a long period of time. That's what leads us to build this allostatic load that moves us towards symptoms of dysregulation. In the same way, it's going to take many, many repeated choices over time, not sexy, but just consistent practice of beneficial habits to undo it. And I part of the reason I named MFIT, I use the phrase mind fitness and mind fitness training is because it really does highlight parallel to physical fitness. And I think there's enough understanding now broadly in our society that you can't be physically fit by just reading about it or working out once or talking to a trainer like one time. And to be physically fit cardiovascularly, to build muscle, you have to be in the gym, lifting weights, running, hiking, biking, whatever it is you're doing, but you're doing it on a regular basis. And when you're not working out, you start to see atrophy over time. That's when you've been on vacation, you come back, you're really winded, right? But it's the same way with all of these other habits. They're foundational ways of living. There's no silver bullet for it. And it's good news that we understand the connections for how it works now. As you put it, we have all this information. But we have to choose each day to live a resilient way. That's our choice.
Absolutely. I'm really cognizant of your time, Liz. I just have like one or two more questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
I see in reading through the book and looking at your bio that you are in a really unique position in working with our military to have gone through exactly what these folks are going through. And we know in our world today, the statistics are staggering on suicide. And having you there in the trenches with these folks is that light at the end of the tunnel for people.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for what you do in bringing this to the world, because it is so important. It is truly a way out for folks.
Thank you for saying that. Yes, it is. What's, I think, so heartbreaking for me about watching so many men and women coming back from multiple deployments, and I want to be clear that when I'm talking about men and women coming back, I'm not just talking about men and women in uniform. You know, we have diplomats overseas. We have people from the Department of Agriculture who are out helping to rebuild agriculture in these countries. We have just a range of civilians out there, too. We have private contractors, lots of Americans who are out there doing this work to help our world be safer. And they're doing it from a place of service. And what's heartbreaking to me is that they're usually, 9 times out of 10, super can-do people. Like they have a lot of self-efficacy. They're doing this from a place of service. And now their minds and bodies are doing what any dysregulated mind and body does. It begins to have symptoms. And it's hard for them not to understand why. And it's hard for them not to know how to fix it and make it better for themselves. And for many people, it's hard to seek help. And I'm hoping that this book is going to help them understand that a lot of this is things they can do for themselves, which is something that they're usually very good at. It's just a matter of knowing what to do and when to do and how to do. And I'm hoping that Widen the Window can help provide that for them. But also sometimes we do need help, that it's too much to do on our own. If we've experienced, and this is not just people who deployed, this is even people who might be writing off their chronic stress as, oh, it's no big deal, or, oh, I haven't been to combat. But if you're having constant symptoms, if there's a lot of physical symptoms or a lot of emotional intensity or, really challenging thoughts, it can be very helpful to have someone help you pace the recovery process for your survival brain so that you don't end up flooding yourself and re-traumatizing and making it worse. And I have some links on my website as well for people that are looking for clinicians and therapists who are trained in some of these body-based techniques to help pace the survival brain recovery process so that sometimes slower is faster. And for those of us who are high achievers or who are used to kind of going and getting it, slower is faster is a really hard thing to do. So it can be helpful sometimes to just have someone help you do that and pace it in a way that's going to be really efficient and effective.
Absolutely. Liz, I'm really grateful for you coming on the show and sharing your book, baby, with our audience today. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we head out?
I am really grateful that you've had me on today, Mike. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope that your listeners enjoy the book. And like I said, on the website, they can find the first exercise and some clinical referrals if they need them, and some of the basics for how to start a mind fitness practice. So www.elizabeth-stanley.com, and I will hope that it's helpful.
Awesome. Is that the best place to find you?
That's the best place to find me. Absolutely.
Sweet. Awesome. All right. I will have all the links in the show notes, folks, and there'll be a link for the book. You can head out to Amazon or your bookseller, and please go out and purchase this book. I think it will really help you going forward. And I want to say again, thank you, Liz, and we'll see you soon, folks. Ciao.
It's Dr. Noah, and I'm back. I suspect you loved listening to this week's podcast release. So the book of the month for October 2019 is Now is the Way, an unconventional approach to modern mindfulness by Corey Allen. I personally highly recommend this book. It really helped me with my meditation practice. You can listen to me interview the author on September 23rd podcast release. The supplement of the month for October 2019 is BYWG's Nutrition's Probiotic Power Blend. Probiotic Power is a shelf-stable, comprehensive probiotic with a whopping 25 billion CFUs in each capsule, meaning it's very potent and includes 9 of the most beneficial bacterial strains from the Lactobacillus and Bifidobacter families. It also contains a small amount of prebiotics as well. For the month of October, the 10% discount code is OCT19 Healthy Gut. Remember, it'll be in the show notes. In the archives on our podcast and on our website, you can listen to a comprehensive review of all our supplements, and in the month of October, one podcast release will be dedicated to Probiotic Power. The product of the month for October is a brand new company that we partnered with, Peak Tea Crystals. My wife and I have been enjoying these super easy to use teas for several weeks and absolutely love them. Peak teas have exquisite flavor and are uber convenient. All you do is tear open a packet, pour the crystals in some water, and stir, hot or cold. Their teas have up to 12 times the antioxidants of other teas, exceed the USDA organic standards, and they're triple toxin screened for pesticides, heavy metals, and mold. You know how important this is. Among those antioxidants are polyphenols that include epicatechins, catechins, 3-O-methyl gallic acid, and caffeic acid, all showing extensive healthy benefits, including gut health. This leads me to an incredible offer for the first 15 days of October, and a perfect complement to our probiotic power. Our friends at Peak Tea were generous enough to give us 17% off discount to share with you on their gut health bundles, including free shipping on U.S. orders from October 1st through October 15th. Most people don't realize that polyphenols in teas are natural prebiotics. It might be the simplest way to keep your gut flora in healthy, natural balance. The kicker is the only way to make sure you're actually getting high-quality polyphenols in sufficient quantities from tea you're drinking. This is where Peak Tea Crystals come into play in a big way. The link to the special gut bundle offer will be in our monthly releases, as well as the direct link to their entire catalog of teas. Thank you for your time. Be awesome and never unawesome.